Welcome to Shares from the American College of Financial Services, where money meets minds. Here's a look at what we'll be sharing with you today.
First question is, how are we going to measure happiness? Is it this sort of moment-to-moment comfort, or is it in, looking back and reflecting on our life?
Hi, I'm Eric Ludwig. I'm the director of the college's Retirement Income Certified Professional Program, and I'll be your host for this conversation on retirement income and planning. I'm joined today by the Dr. Daniel Crosby. If you don't know him, he's the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion Advisor Solutions, and he's a psychologist, a behavioral finance expert, and author of the upcoming book that I'm really excited to ask you about today, which is titled The Soul of Wealth. And we're also joined by Jamie Hopkins, and he's the CEO of Bryn Mawr Capital Management, Chief Wealth Officer at WSFS Bank. So Daniel, Jamie, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Eric, thank you for having us.
This is awesome. I have to say, if listeners don't already listen to the Standard Deviations podcast, I'm going to ask them to do so. I'm really excited to have the tables flipped here and have you as a guest.
No, thank you very much. We're like 300 episodes in, and it sometimes feels like screaming into the abyss. So it's good to know that people are listening.
Absolutely. One of the things that we like to do on the podcast is it's called Shares for a reason. Part of it is we like to have people share kind of their background of how they got into this weird world of financial advising and being a psychologist. I'm excited to hear your path and your story. So how did you get into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I grew up, I'm the son of a financial advisor. So from my youth, I was talking about investing around the kitchen table, talking about stocks and bonds at dinner. And so I grew up with a passion for markets, and my dad is sort of like an old school stock picking type almost. He really loves the game. And then I went to school, and my freshman year I was taking a bunch of psychology courses, and I absolutely fell in love. I mean, I was really just taking them to complete some general ed courses, but absolutely fell in love with psychology. And after that freshman year of school, I went on a 2-year mission for my church, and that sort of further deepened my interest in values and culture and the way people behave. I was in Manila, Philippines for 2 years, experiencing things and that a kid from Alabama isn't usually exposed to. And so I just really fell in love with studying why people think, act, and behave the ways they do. So, sort of fast forward, I come back from that mission, I, finish school, get into grad school. And about halfway through grad school, I won't lie to you, I absolutely burned out to the ground. I couldn't do it anymore. The work of being a psychotherapist was too stressful. I was taking work home with me. I had poor boundaries. It was heavy work, I think, especially for a young man. I was 23 when I started doing it. And so I came to my dad, who's a great friend and mentor, and I said, hey, I love thinking about why people do the things they do, but I don't know that I want to do it in a medical or a clinical setting. And he said to me, there's a ton of psychology in my work as a financial advisor. And that blew my mind, because to me, he was a sales guy, he was a stock picker, he was anything but a counselor or a therapist. And, to make a long story short, it was that comment that planted the seed for me. Now, my dad did not know the phrase behavioral economics or behavioral finance, but it was just that conversation that put me on a path to explore and later specialize in this intersection of mind and markets.
It's really amazing how, one, you're around and engulfed in this experience of the wealth world, but that a small conversation can really be that pivotal moment where it shifts, right? And, I think that you have, to me, probably a pivotal moment coming up for you, whether you fully know where it'll lead yet or not, but you have your new book, The Soul of Wealth, coming out. And, I know that's been kind of an amazing, pre-launch experience for you, and I got to read it and, really big fan of it. I think it's amazing. But when did you, I know we've talked about this once before, can you tell us a little bit, how did that book come to be? And it's probably a little different than the first version that you thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's way different. Well, Jamie, first of all, Jamie gave a sort of a raving video review of the book on social media that I think has done more to sell copies of the book than any other thing. So I'm deeply appreciative of that. But, I had written 2 previous books on behavioral finance. One was sort of for retail facing investors about, best sort of the 10 commandments of behavioral finance for them. One was a more advisor facing work that even talked about integrating behavioral finance into asset management. But both of them, especially the second one, were a little esoteric. They were a little industry facing. And what I found was that people were beginning to internalize these principles, but there was still something missing. And my work brought me in proximity to a lot of people with a lot of money, but I found that them having a lot of money and them leading a good life, seldom intersected. And so it got me interested in this concept of, money and meaning, and this intersection of money and meaning. So I knew I wanted to write a book about money and purpose. But I started it, and I started to do it in sort of the way that I had written the others, which was in a really conventional sort of, 10 or 12 chapters, 20 pages a piece format. And it just sucked. I don't know what else to say. It just was dry. My heart wasn't in it. And I had gotten about 80 pages deep, and I'm much better. I'm bad about the editing process. Some people sort of take, joy in pruning and stuff. It hurts me. It's like, cutting off a limb or something. And so I had to eventually chuck those 80 pages because they just weren't good. And about this time that I'm sort of coming to grips with the fact that these 80 pages are not that good, I was reading Rick Rubin's book. So Rick Rubin is the producer who worked with Jay-Z and the Beastie Boys and others. And he has this book called The Creative Act, which is like 70 chapters long. And each chapter is like 2 to 4 pages. And it's just real pithy. Like, it's very digestible. And for me, as someone who has a big job, as someone who has a big family, by the time I can pick up a book at night, I'm pretty beat up. By the time 7:30 rolls around, I'm pretty tired. And Rick Rubin's book was perfect for me. It was like perfectly digestible. I could read 2 or 3 chapters a night and feel like I made progress. And so I started over from scratch writing the book with this Rick Rubin-esque approach, and it ended up being 50 essays, like 50 short form chapters, and that transformed it for me. It ignited my passion for the theme, and it went so well. For me, getting this book right was really all about finding the right format.
One of the things I remember was on LinkedIn seeing your different cover ideas, which I thought, man, I just feel like I'd be nervous to even put out the work knowing that it's not done. But I thought that was really cool how you garnered feedback in that process.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I hope people will judge this book by its cover. It's a long, boring story, but I sort of had to go at it with my publisher to get the cover that I wanted. There was a disagreement between me and the powers that be, and in the end, I got the cover that I wanted, and I'm very glad I did, because I think it's beautiful and very different than the kind of covers you'd see. But Eric, I'm a big believer in building in public. I think it's fun. It's enjoyable for me. I think you bring the reader, the potential reader, along a little bit, like they feel like they've contributed to the process. And there's 1 or 2 folks in our space who really kind of build in public and are very transparent about their wins and losses. And I always respect those people, and tried to do a little bit of the same thing with my book.
I think the cover looks great, and it's more like I don't know, like it's got that journalish, world feel to it. It's like, I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but there's the book The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran, and it actually reminds me of that, even like the size of the book, if you've ever read that one. It's one of my favorite books. And I've went through the same thing with a publisher. I will tell you, I did not fight the fight well enough, because I probably ended up with a cover that I was kind of indifferent on. But it was better than some of the other versions of it. I will say that. The other versions I really hated.
Well, it's hard in our space, and I think especially when you're in behavioral finance, I've given them instruction. I've been heavily involved with all of my covers, and it's like, hey, no brains, no pictures of a brain, no dollar bill signs, no seed growing out of a coin or whatever. There's so many just sort of like dumb tropes. And then when you introduce the soul piece, it was hard not to make it sort of overtly religious, which I didn't want to do, or then on the other side you get kind of like new agey corny. So yeah, I'm really happy where we landed. It was not easy though.
Well, Dr. Crosby, I want to ask, so we talked about the cover. I want to get into the book a bit, and I'm sure that when you're doing media things for this, you probably get a lot of the same questions, and I'm going to try, I'm sure those will come up as we go, but I want to ask some what I think are kind of fun ones. You have some kind of cool parallels in there, and I was hoping you could share a little bit about Victor Hugo's writing habits, if you know what I'm talking about, and how those relate to maybe how people should think about their wealth.
Yeah, I do. Just a quick word on the format of the book. Each of the 50 chapters begins with some sort of anecdote, then goes into some research on, the thing that the anecdote is trying to represent, and then goes into like a point or two on application. I found that just an engaging sort of formula, like read a story, read the science. Okay, now what do I do about it? The Victor Hugo chapter is about, Victor Hugo, of course, author of Les Mis and other, Hunchback and other timeless works and some pretty giant works. He ran into what and I'm sure Jamie and other writers have run into, which is, you start procrastinating, right? Your house gets very clean. You end up, making yourself 5 meals a day or whatever, doing anything but writing your book and finishing your work. And so what Victor Hugo would do, he was like a fine dresser, and he liked to parade around town in his finery. Well, he would lock his clothes up and write in the nude, physically, making it impossible, or at least, improbable, that he would go parade around the streets of Paris in the buff. And so he would lock up these clothes and, give the key to a friend and say, look, like, you can't give me the key back until I am done with my work. It's effectively, the psychological term for it is a pre-commitment device, deciding once I'm going to pre-commit to this activity, and then it's going to keep me on the straight and narrow. If you look at what's I think arguably or maybe inarguably the most powerful behavioral finance intervention around, it's one by Dick Thaler and Shlomo Bernartzi called Save More Tomorrow, where you commit today to auto-enroll and auto-escalate your future savings. So it's easy today to say, yeah, in 20 years when I make twice as much money, let's save some of that money, because it's not real yet. When you get there, it's hard because now it is real. But your current self can write a check that your future self is unlikely to undo. So these pre-commitments are powerful, and I just found the story of Victor Hugo, riding naked, pretty hilarious and memorable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons that advisors, financial professionals can take away from that too, just in their own efficiency. And it doesn't just have to be in writing; it's removing some of the distractions too. There's something that I've had my teams do before too, which is in our team meeting that people turn their cell phones off. We turn all the beeps and everything off from email and Teams, because you often see people sit in meetings constantly distracted. It's not as big of an undertaking as writing a book, but those minor distractions really pull you away. And I usually tell people, haven't you been in an important thing before, and all of a sudden that email comes through and you see the name of the person even if you haven't seen it, and you can't focus on anything else but that one email because it's important, and even if you don't open it, it's weighing on you. And yeah, when I wrote my first book, I actually went to San Diego and went to a hotel and basically sat there in the dark for like 3 days and wrote. And like I didn't see anybody, I didn't hang out with anybody. I turned the internet off on my like computer so I couldn't go search things and just get distracted. And so I was closed though. So, but I'm not as into my clothing.
Yeah, only Jamie could go to the most beautiful place in the country and still get down to business. Well done, sir.
I have a friend that's going to Kansas in a couple weeks to do the same thing to finish his dissertation. For some reason, it won't have the same appeal, Jamie, as the pull of the beach.
Yeah. I wanted a place where I could go walk in between and not be worried it was raining or something. So that was the only thing. So I had to just pick San Diego and went. And it was very helpful for me.
The American College of Financial Services, championing causes, connecting communities, delivering best-in-class applied financial knowledge and education
for the benefit of professionals like you and for the benefit of society.
Expand your opportunities at the all-new theamericancollege.edu.
Dr. Crosby, we talk a lot about this, like you kind of mentioned it, that your dad was maybe one of the stock picking type of financial advisors. And I know when I first started in the industry in 2007, there was still a fair amount then that were, making their business on brokered CDs and things like that. We've obviously seen this transition over time to doing more planning, financial planning based advising. I'm wondering, I think your book, if I'm not mistaken, covers some of this, but I'm curious, in your opinion, what are some of the elements of a good financial plan? How does that maybe differ from what sort of the typical or the average advisor might be providing today?
Yeah, I'll speak to that from sort of a behavioral perspective. I think people like Jamie are probably better able to speak to that from a nuts and bolts technical perspective. But one of the things that I always harp on is we do a bad job on the front end of helping people articulate their goals and their values. It's kind of like trying to decide on a mode of transportation but not knowing where you're going yet, right? It's like, do you want to take bus, plane, train? Well, like, where are we going? And a lot of times we decide on the vehicle before we decide on the destination. And so you think about most people's goals. If you ask, Joe on the street, what are your financial goals? Typically what you're going to get is one of a couple of things. We know that people's goals, if not guided a bit, first of all, tend to be highly mimetic. They tend to be based on what they've seen in the world around them. So if their neighbor got a boat or a second home, then they want a second home. We also know that they can kind of land on sort of round numbers, $1 million, $10 million, land on round numbers for simplicity's sake in a way that's sort of divorced from the realities of their life or the realities of what they'll need. So I think asking someone the simple question like, hey, what are your financial goals, is almost always going to elicit a suboptimal answer. And we need to do a lot more work to sort of get at what really is that bottommost turtle, what really is that thing that's beneath it all, and then B, make it visceral for them. The father and son duo of the Doctors Klontz has done some interesting research on the power of making these things vivid, and I talk about that in the book. People who had a vivid financial goal were dramatically more likely to meet it, right? So don't just say, hey, I want to retire to the mountains. It's like, what's the cabin going to look like? What's it going to smell like in the morning when you leave? What are you going to do? Who's going to be with you? Really helping people get at what is deeply meaningful to them, and then create ways of making that more visceral and real for them. And then you work on, the nuts and bolts of the plan or the vehicle that'll help you get there. And I think a lot of times we put the vehicle before the values.
I feel like I'm just required to chime in on the smell aspect now, right? Is it pancakes or waffles or bacon or scrapple? That's like, what does the morning smell like, Daniel?
Okay, so first of all, no one outside of Pennsylvania knows what scrapple is, sir. It's gonna smell like maple syrup and pine trees, okay? Scrapple. How dare you?
Look, that's a core part. The American college base right here, in Pennsylvania. It's core to our history.
I've never had it. I hope that we can break bread over some scrapple one day, Jamie.
Yeah, I like to vividly imagine Dr. Solomon or Huebner, who was the founder of the college, sitting there one morning eating Scrapple and deciding to launch the college. I assume that's how it all started. So, Dr. Daniel, one of the cool things is in RICP, the Retirement Income Certified Professional designation that Eric leads up at the college, right? To explore that concept of kind of money and happiness and how it intersects with retirement income planning. So, I think one of the questions I'd love to get some of your insight is like, where do people go wrong here when they're looking at that money and happiness mix, especially if you can relate it a little bit to retirement?
Yeah, there's a lot to say here because the science is changing a little bit. When it comes to money and happiness, I think for many years we cited this study out of Princeton by Daniel Kahneman that said that happiness kind of plateaued at $75,000. The thinking there has been refined a bit. A lot of people, myself included, really like that message because I think it conformed to a lot of our priors. The thinking was you can't buy happiness. But one thing we have to say is that it matters how you measure happiness. Because we see in the research when you ask people to just appraise their life, right? Say like, Jamie, how's your life? Eric, how's your life? Happiness increases up to about $500,000 per year, right? So when it comes to sort of general life appraisal, there's some evidence that money does buy happiness. When you measure happiness another way, there's another way they measure it where they kind of give people a pager. If you think back to your drug dealing days of the 80s and 90s, if you get someone a beeper, right, and you beep them a few times and you say, hey, a few times throughout the day, how happy are you, right? Then it does plateau at a much lower level. So, first question is, how are we going to measure happiness? Is it this sort of moment-to-moment comfort, or is it in, looking back and reflecting on our life? The second thing we know is that the absence of money absolutely buys misery, right? People at low levels of wealth are miserable, and it makes sense. If you don't live in a safe neighborhood, if you don't have enough to eat, if you can't fix your air conditioning when it breaks, these things make you miserable. So we do know that it's a little bit of a mixed bag to the upside, but that happiness we can definitely protect against the downside with happiness. The other thing that I would say is there's certain ways we can spend money for happiness that reliably buy us some. One way is spending time with people we love. Another way is buying novelty. If I take a trip to Japan, Japan looks a lot different than Georgia. And so I try new foods, I see new people, I hear new language, I see new parts of the world. That sticks with me because of the novelty or the newness. That buys happiness. Getting ourselves out of work that we hate reliably buys happiness. I will never, ever mow my lawn again, God willing, right? Like assuming I can stay employed. I hope to never touch a lawnmower again. That buys me happiness. And then the last way we can buy happiness is by giving money away. And, I have a couple of chapters in the book about philanthropy and charitable acts being a path to abundance that I'm very fond of. With respect to retirement in specific, I think that we over-index on the financial aspects of happiness, and we don't attend to the other pieces. Like if you look at Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology, he would say that happiness is this constellation of things that includes, leisure time, meaningful work, strong relationships, working for something bigger than yourself, religion, spirituality, philanthropy, and growth, personal growth, getting better than you were yesterday, being better today than you were yesterday. a lot of times when we're preparing for retirement, we prepare for the leisure, right? We like, I want to make sure I have enough money to, to buy that second home or to golf a lot or to go to the beach or live by the shore. And that's part of the answer. But I don't think we give it adequate consideration to what am I going to do for work, even if it's part-time or avocational, right? What am I going to do to keep my relationship strong? What am I going to do to grow? I think that the financial piece and sort of the leisure piece blots out those other pieces, which are just as important.
I was just thinking about that too, Daniel, with the personal growth aspect, where there's this interesting trade-off that you mentioned where a lot of people end up retiring earlier than what they thought they were going to, right? So you have people that for health reasons or whatever, they end up retiring earlier. But at the same point, you have people that end up sort of retiring from their traditional job and then going back to do this encore career. And I was thinking about the type of clients that advisors work with are usually these people that have done well in life. And so for them just to like stop working is probably not good for their life satisfaction. So you think about those are also probably the type of people that are going to benefit from this personal growth aspect, and maybe it's just not in the same field that they had before.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And one thing that I learned from your colleague Dr. Finca is he came on my podcast and he talked about a study where they found that people who bought, if you buy a sports car in retirement, that doesn't tend to buy you a lot of happiness unless the sports car gives you access to the cars and coffee community that meets every Saturday. So effectively, you're using your money to buy access to deeper relationships. And so, when we talk about those 5 elements of happiness, I think that sometimes there are ways where we can spend money, like the car club, to sort of get an adjacency to meet that need in a way. But yeah, I think we do a lot of sort of one-dimensional planning for retirement for sure.
So one of the things you just kind of pointed out there was really the way we use money, the way we tie it to our community or lifestyle has an impact on the happiness, right? So it's more than the dollars or the item itself, but it's what does it all mean? And I think that actually raises this interesting question about the title of the book, Soul of Wealth. It's like, it's not just wealth. It's not called Wealth in and of itself book, right? It's the soul of wealth. And I think that leans into this. But how did you end up with that? And what did that mean from you when you talk about the soul of wealth?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jamie. So when you think about how we use the word soul, I think there's sort of layers to the title. One way that we use soul is to refer to the essence of something, right? And so one thing that I'm trying to get at in the book is like, what are the essential elements of wealth? And it's my hope that the ideas in the book will be timeless, right? I mean, I have written books about, say, factor investing or something. Those things change over time. They work well. They don't, they fall in and out of favor. We find new investing anomalies. We arbitrage them away. The things that I talk about in this book are soulful in the sense that they're essential, they're timeless, and they're unchanging. The second thing is that a soul is unseen, right? For those people who believe that human beings have a soul, that's different than their physical appearance. And when it comes to wealth, I mean, there's the wealth that we can stack and accumulate and see in our bank account. But then there's that soulful wealth, which is the true wealth, which is unseen. So I think it is both essential and invisible, and for that reason doesn't get talked about in the way that it ought to.
I love that, but I'm a little disappointed, Daniel. Do you know why? Because you left out music, and I mean, come on, soul music and.
Look, a guy from, I'm from near Muscle Shoals, Alabama. We could have talked about soul food, soul music. That's all in there too. But it's a tertiary thing. We got to the big two.
So, Danny, when you say some of the things there's the things that you can see, which, we just did a presentation on this, that some of the benefits that an advisor provides to a client are some of the things show up on a financial statement, but most of them do not. Is that what you're kind of getting at? It's like some of these financial anxiety reducing and retirement confidence things. Is that what you're meaning, or is it more of the 5 elements of happiness?
Well, I think it's a little bit holistic, but if we want to talk about the work of an advisor in specific, I think there's some soulful elements there that are both essential and invisible. A lot of times, when people seek out a financial advisor, ostensibly it's because they need financial advice, they need a portfolio built. But when we look at the research around people who work with financial professionals, they have higher global levels of happiness, they're less likely to get divorced, they have lower levels of anxiety, they have better marital communication, better preparedness for an emergency, in addition to the financial upside of working with a financial professional. So I think, part of the message of folks like the 3 of us on this call is to talk about advisors being more than someone who can get you, more coins in the piggy bank. The thing about money is that it touches every part of our lives. And so if an advisor can help you get your financial house in order, there's a reasonable assumption that many different parts of your life should be elevated. And again, they're harder to stack, they're harder to quantify, but I don't think we should be shy as an industry in talking about the ways in which working with a professional can lift many boats in a person's life.
Well, you had mentioned at the beginning of the show some thoughts around like helping those goals be more vivid. Is there other things too that if you have that advisor that is like, man, I really love this stuff. I love this behavioral finance stuff. I like the ideas from the Soul of Wealth, but I'm not quite sure if there's a couple initial steps that would help me get moving in the right direction. Are there a couple things that pop into your mind if you're like, oh yeah, you want to help implement these in practice? These are a couple things that advisors could do.
Yeah. So for the very first thing, I think, of a frustration of mine, less so with this book, more so with the other books where I was talking about bias and sort of irrational behavior, is that a lot of times professionals would read the books and come to me and say, wow, that's totally my client, or that's my wife, or that's my buddy. And I think the first person we need to look at is ourselves when we're looking at these behavioral finance type books. Jason Zweig has this great piece in an article he wrote about using behavioral finance as a mirror onto our own behavior first, and not a window onto other people's behavior. So the first thing and the most critical thing that I would say is read a book like The Soul of Wealth with an eye to examining your own financial behavior and your own money story and your own concept of wealth, because people, this is a woo-woo comment, this is a soulful, unscientific comment, but people who have done the work personally and people who have not, you can tell the difference, right? When you're sitting down with someone who has been through a process of self-examination and self-honesty, it's a different experience than when you're sitting down with someone who's not vetted their own traits and their own values. So first, seek to use it as a mirror would be the first thing. And the second thing, pick your intervention, right? Like it could be something small like pre-commitment. It could be, using one of the great behavioral tools that are out there from a technology perspective. It could be taking a course and using a communication style that's indicated by, folks like me. Integrate that into your practice in a small way, and I think you're going to see that the returns are outsized. And I think that'll be all you need to go the rest of the way. If you give your clients just that first taste of that human first sort of behaviorally informed experience, I think you're going to be hooked and be back for more.
I know it was part of a sort of a sales experience recently, and the person went direct to sort of solution without wanting to know anything about me. And I thought, man, I think like you're mentioning, there's some of these things people want to talk about their own goals, and I like how you said to help them sort of focalize some of the things that they're thinking and turn into more concrete. I think that's so helpful for individuals, especially if they are nervous about do I have enough, let alone, how am I going to implement this?
Yeah, Eric, I read something recently that the number one fear of people who are coming in to see an advisor is the fear of being judged. And the fear that they're going to get, scolded for not having their paperwork in order, or they did everything wrong. And so I think if we can understand that the fact that they've even come through our door in the first place is a gift, and we can treat them like a whole person and not just someone who, screwed up their taxes or whatever. I think that's I feel like there's a very different experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of people worry about that, are they going to be judged, or are they worthy of the advice and time of this person, and that they don't meet the requirements that somebody should meet to get advice. And that's a hurdle, and I think every advisor, every time you meet with a client, every time you meet with a prospective client or anybody, that we're lowering down that fear of working with a professional in this space in the way we communicate and welcome people in. And I had an interesting thing that we were doing before, was also asking clients over time, where do they go after they come in? And I thought it was such an interesting thing, right? Do they run to the bar to have a drink because they're so stressed? Do they go celebrate after they meet with you, right? Like, what is it they do after they meet with you? I think it's such an interesting question to kind of start to gauge, how do they react to your meeting? So I think that's powerful. And the reflection and mirror part, I would say, as people read The Soul of Wealth, as I think a lot of the people who didn't get a pre-copy or weren't at Orion Ascent, you can pre-order them. They're coming out, and pretty soon here they'll be available fully.
Yep. October 15th it drops, but available for pre-order now, and pre-order really helps get it in bookstores, and as Jamie knows.
Yeah. But as you read it, one of the things I did when I shot the video was there were about 2 or 3 things as I went through it that really required me to reflect back on my own experiences and self. And I'd say be open to that when you read the book too. Like, go in with that mind of be open to reflect on yourself, and how do you relate to some of these things? How do you think about things? How do you feel about things? Because it's not just like an X's and O, I'm going to learn how to do Roth conversions book, right? It's a lot of reflection into that point, the soul of wealth. So be prepared to explore it yourself.
I think what you guys mentioned was great, because a lot of times when you read about biases, your default is yeah, I can see that in other people, but not me. So I can see that there is a lot of benefits to thinking, what are my own sort of issues to work on. I thought it would be fun to wrap up with something kind of fun here. You can't believe everything that you read on the internet, but what I think I read about you, Dr. Crosby, is that you're a hot sauce fan, and if so, I'm curious what your favorite hot sauce is.
Okay, I'm gonna take a point of privilege here and say 2. Probably my first favorite is Truff. It's a red hot sauce with black truffle oil in it, and it is so good. It is so good. Shout out to Oprah, who put it on her favorite things list one Christmas and got me into it, because it is expensive, but it will change your life. The other thing to do, I just bought 15 bottles of this, is Buc-ee's, the obnoxiously large gas station that you find it's out of Texas. They have them in the Southeast at least, probably all over now. But Buc-ee's has a peach habanero hot sauce that is really nice. Neither of them are super spicy. I'm not I put hot sauce on everything, but I don't love super, super hot stuff. Just want a little flavor. So yeah, Truff and Buc-ee's peach habanero are really excellent.
Those both sound amazing. Jamie, do you have a favorite or a go-to condiment?
Yeah, I do have 2. I love hot sauce though, but I'm not. I eat a lot of buffalo chicken cheesesteaks here in the Philly area. Those are one of my go-to things, so I love those. But my condiments, I'm kind of known for my love of mayonnaise, unfortunately. So my Hellmann's mayonnaise love is pretty high up there. And then Heinz ketchup also, big fan of ketchup. I think it was back in 2020 when, I don't know, Dr. Crosby, if you partook in that wonderful fundraising experience, but we actually did get a lot of people going on eating and drinking weird things with ketchup back then. So Tyrone Ross, who's in our space too, Tony Steek at Market Council now, and I started a little campaign. I think we ended up raising about $26,000 for No Kid Hungry by eating weird things with ketchup. So I did coffee, Tony Steek did champagne. I forget what Tyrone did, maybe gummy bears, I think, or cupcakes and ketchup. And we posted the video and we were matching donations. So yeah, those are the two for me. They're pretty standard, but I love cheeseburgers and I love mayonnaise and Heinz ketchup. I don't like homemade ketchups. They're trash. I throw them out. You got to travel with your Heinz just in case you show up somewhere that's got catsup and you can't eat there then.
Oh, that's funny. I have to give a real quick shout out to one of our American college colleagues, Steve Parrish. He got me turned on to this Datehill pepper from the Jacksonville area where he winters, and that's been kind of my go-to ever since then. I love eating it on eggs in the morning.
I have a what can only be called a grow operation back here in my bathroom. I have one of those little light operations with the plants, and I'm growing datil peppers in my bathroom right behind me as we speak. Very good, very good.
That's awesome. Well, regardless of what you're growing in your own bathroom, we are super thankful to you, Dr. Crosby, for being on the Shares podcast today, and Jamie, of course. You always find a way to wiggle into the cool stuff that we're doing here.
It's true.
So thanks for sharing your time and for coordinating this. Thank you guys for spending your time with us today.
That's all for now, but you can find all our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other streaming services. Be sure to like us, follow us, and leave us a rating and review. Shares is a production of the American College of Financial Services, and we hope you join us next time as we share ideas that expand your opportunities.